Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we got a question from Vaughn Glover, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think the prophecy of the Chosen One may have been misread? Again regarding Anakin defeating the Sith bringing balance to the Force. If we analyze the events on Mortis, the Force went out of balance after the father, son, and daughter died. And although the Emperor met his demise on the Death Star, the second one, the seats of the Force wielders are still empty in need of replacement. This is what I believe Anakin, Ahsoka, and some other person are destined to fulfill. I also believe Balin understood the function of the Force wielders from the stories he heard as a former Jedi, and seeks to be one to bring balance as the father once did with his children. We know Anakin was a Jedi, but he is the Chosen One, something more. His apprentice, Tano, was uniquely trained as a Jedi to become something more. Balin expressed to his apprentice Shin-Hati she was trained to be again something more. And finally, when asked by Anakin, the father being Sith or Jedi, his reply was that of him being something much more than those titles. I believe Dave Filoni is completing Anakin's destiny as the Chosen One, and it is a Star Wars story that's not only good for the franchise, but one that should be absolutely told. Okay, so when it comes to the prophecy of the Chosen one of the biggest issues we have is that we don't know exactly what it says. We only know that it says something along the lines of there will be a Chosen One, he will destroy the Sith, and that will bring balance to the Force. And how you could misread that, as Yoda famously says, I don't know, unless there's a lot more to it, unless it's a lot more mysteriously written, if you will, like prophecies tend to be. But either way, we don't know exactly what the prophecy says, which I think is probably by design. I think Lucas didn't want us to know. And when I say we don't know what it says, I am referring strictly to Lucas canon, if you will. And so we always have that issue of, like, what exactly could they have misread in this thing? Does it simply say a chosen one will come about, he will destroy the Sith, and there will be balance? Or is there, again, a lot more? Is it a long-winded statement about who knows what? Either way, when the end of Return of the Jedi comes around, I do think there is balance in the Force when Vader comes back to the light, thus destroying Darth Vader, and then tosses Palpatine down the shaft, thus destroying Darth Sidious, and both Sith are then dead, and we only have Luke left as a Jedi and Anakin for a few fleeting moments, and thus that is balance. The absence of the dark side, or those using the dark side, as I've said a million times before, that is what balance in Star Wars is supposed to be, according to Lucas. And he has even said that at the end of Return of the Jedi, there is balance. Now, all that said, George Lucas was still very much around and in charge when the Mortis story arc came out. And I completely understand why a lot of people watch that, and I'm not necessarily saying you're misinterpreting this or other people are, but a lot of people have a lot of different beliefs of what that Mortis arc is supposed to mean. Now, I have watched it many, many times at this point, and my takeaway, and I'm not saying I am 100% right, but what I take away from it when I closely examine it and kind of try to put it in the context of George Lucas Star Wars as well, what he thinks of balance and all of that, my biggest takeaway is that you cannot control the dark side, period. You can only manage it for a little while, but it will always rise again. It will always rear its ugly head and do something that tries to unbalance everything. Keep in mind, and I'm not going fully into the Mortis arc here, I've done that in previous videos, but keep in mind that the father and the daughter are basically working together to try to keep the sun in check and try to keep him from breaking free into the galaxy and causing havoc and chaos and all of that. It's essentially the balance and the light working together to stop the dark side. And I know, again, others will have a different interpretation, but when you really watch it, when you really think about it, that is exactly what is happening. The balance is failing, the father is dying, and he wants someone to come in, he wants Anakin to come in to keep the dark side in check, because he knows if he is gone, if the balance is gone, the dark side will rise. All that said, I do not disagree with you that Dave Filoni is going to maybe reinterpret a few things. He is going to lean heavily into the Mortis arc, obviously from the end of Ahsoka Season 1, that is where we are heading. That Balin is going to discover something about the Ones or the Mortis gods, whatever you would prefer to call them, the Force wielders. He also, as you suggest, seems to have heard the stories. He seems to know something about the beginning of everything, he kind of alludes to at one point. So I do think he has a very grand purpose when it comes to all this. I do think that maybe he fully believes he needs to put this all back together again when it comes to the Mortis gods. And maybe that's also how Filoni is going to interpret it or reinterpret what balance is, which I kind of hope it isn't. Again, I personally don't think Mortis is meant to say that we need a sort of balance between the dark and the light. It more says the balance and the light work together to keep the dark in check, or that the light is the balance, essentially. Anyway, again, I do agree that Filoni's intent here is to sort of give an explanation to all the Mortis stuff once and for all, and maybe even bring in an Abeloth. I don't know if he's going to do that. A lot of people think he is, that's some sort of prison for Abeloth we are seeing with the beacon at the end of the Ahsoka series or season 1. I don't think that's impossible. I just don't know that you want to bring in something quite like Abeloth into the more mainstream canon. We'll see. But either way, I do think there is an intent here to explain Mortis, maybe get further into what exactly the prophecy of the Chosen One actually said and how it could have been misread, and maybe there was more to it. I also think there may be a desire from Filoni to sort of fix the legacy of Anakin, because as it stands right now, he didn't exactly balance the Force, because Palpatine was, of course, still around and comes back in The Rise of Skywalker. And even if he does somehow imply that Anakin is going to become maybe the new father, with Ahsoka being the new daughter and potentially Baylan being the new son, you still, of course, have the problem of all roads lead to the sequel trilogy. It's going to be rather strange if we have this story about how balance is brought kind of internally to the Force with the new Force wielders taking their positions, and then it's like a few years later, oh yeah, Palpatine's back and we need to stop him. I guess we didn't really balance things after all. And so again, yeah, I agree, you are probably on the right track here. I just don't know how much I personally like the idea. Not that I dislike your idea, I just don't know how much I like the idea of 3 gods essentially being the balance of the Force. To me, I've always had a little bit of an issue with the Mortis arc in general from Clone Wars. Now, I've come to like it more because, like I said, I've watched it so many times that I think I understand what it is trying to say. And I do believe it makes a rather good point about trying to control the dark side and how that is just a recipe for disaster. You can't do it. But I don't know that I like the idea of replacing the Mortis gods and that is somehow going to make everything fine, when the idea behind Star Wars is, again, as I always say, the choices the individuals make. If there are essentially gods keeping everything in balance, does that mean the choices of the person, of the individual, don't matter as much anymore? Even though if we look at the first 6 movies, it is all about the choices of the individual. It's all about the choices that people like Anakin and obviously Luke make and how that shapes the entire galaxy, which is a reminder to us here on Earth, whether you believe in a higher power or not, that what we do matters, that what we do impacts not only ourselves, but the people around us and potentially a lot of people around us or the entire world. And to be clear, I'm not trying to make any sort of argument against religion here. I do not want to open up that can of worms and have that debate. I'm simply saying that what people do matters, and that is one thing I always have loved about Star Wars, that what the people do, what the individuals do with the powers or the choices given to them is what matters, not necessarily gods having the power to shape everything or influence everything or change things, that it is, again, up to the individuals and their choices. Alright, well, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Do you think this is what the Ahsoka series is ultimately going to try and do? Is it going to try and redeem Anakin's destiny, as suggested by our question here? Or does it have something else in store? And what do you believe the whole Mortis thing is meant to represent? Is it that there is a balance when we have an equal light and equal dark entity and some sort of more powerful entity between them? Or do you think I'm more on the right track, that it is about how the dark side cannot be controlled no matter how much you try, but you are going to try because you have to try, because the dark side will get out of hand one way or the other? Whatever the case may be, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.